Hey, yo, it's me, Pops Van Marmalade, and you're watching the Comics-Related Madness Network. Uh-huh. So come get some. CromCon. CromCon.
Your favorite podcast is Critical Blast.
Hey, we want to shout out to our sponsors, Daytona Beach Comic Con. If you are a fan of comic books, if you're a fan of comic book conventions, and if you like meeting comic book creators and getting comics and comic-related stuff, then you need to make your plans to attend Daytona Beach Comic Con. This year's show is September 9th and 10th. Silverline will be there, so you should make your plans to be there too. We'll see you there. If you like comics and find yourself in the Orlando, Florida area, doesn't everyone come to Orlando at some point in time to see the House of Mouse? But when you're here, you need to make it a point to visit Coliseum of Comics, especially the one on East Colonial Drive. They carry Silverline comics, even a limited edition Coliseum of Comics version of our comics. So, when you go, be sure to ask for Silverline Comics and tell them we sent you. OCD stands for Orlando Collector Deviants. OCD, Steve and Trish. They're a family of geeks who promote geek things, particularly those around the Orlando, Florida area. They're big supporters of Silverline, and we think you should be supporters of theirs too. Go give them some love. If you are an independent comic book maker and you need to get your independent comics made, you need to look no further than Kablam Digital Printing. They print our books, and they do a bang-up job. They're not only trusted by Silverline, but many, many independent comic book makers. Head on over to kablam.com and see for yourself just how easy it is to have your comic printed by them. And tell them Silverline sent you.
Hi, this is Tim TK, host of That Silverline Show on Tuesday. Join us at 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Pacific every Tuesday night as we discuss pop culture and the joys of making comics.
Hi, I'm Roland Mann, and I host Silverline's Silver Sunday. Join me every Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern as we make mine Silverline.
World of comic books and comic book creation. We have Aaron Humphreys, we have Barbara Kaelberg, and we have the sometimes present Tommy Flormonte, the nocturnal inker, ladies and gentlemen, who is going to enlighten us tonight on how he does all his work without sleeping. Aren't you, Tommy?
I'm going to do it by showing you how I'm going to sleep right now.
Oh, see, it's already begun. It's already begun, everybody. I want to start before we get on our subject tonight, which is going to be very cool. I want to thank our sponsor, Daytona Beach Comic Book Convention, for supporting us and for putting on a great con for those of you lucky enough to visit with Silverline and Silverline creators. And we also have a Kickstarter and an Indiegogo up right now. This is our Christmas special. You can log into either the Indiegogo, which give that a little more love because we're just getting started on that, or the Kickstarter, and follow it so you'll be notified and you can pre-order when it's available and get the book. We have at least 15 stories we know are confirmed. Others are close to being completed or going to be in the book. Mine's going to be in there. I think everybody here is going to have a story in there. Barb is way ahead of us all. Barb, you're about done, aren't you?
I am on the second to the last page of coloring, and it's been inked. And I believe it's being lettered at the moment. And I'm on the second to the last page of coloring. It'll be done before the weekend.
Oh my goodness. I'm going to send you some of the ones that I'm supposed to be working on so you can help me out.
Well, that sounds great.
I am behind, so I got to get jamming.
I am too. Hey, Tommy, you got to ink my pages at some point, and but
I'm inking everybody's pages.
I know you are. I know. So what I was going to tell you was just save mine a little bit because I need like another week. So we're good.
I'm working on them.
Appreciate it.
But after I take a nap, and then I'll.
Yeah, if you take a nap, I understand. So our subject tonight, folks, we're going to get into some really cool stuff tonight. We're going to be talking about styles of comic book illustration and how they relate to the content of the story and the characters, specifically from cartoons to anime to levels of realism, why they matter, why we like them, why they work, why some may not work, and why certain content requires certain styles. And also a little bit about, just setting the table here, a little bit about whether our own skill sets are part of the limitation of styles. I know just from my experience, I can mimic styles, but I wouldn't want to do that all the time because it takes a lot longer and I'm already slow. What about you, Barb? You've inked a lot of stuff, so you're probably extremely experienced with being able to mimic lots of different styles. I know you've probably been asked to do that. Is that the case?
Oh, absolutely. I've been asked to. Well, I worked on the Angry Beavers Halloween special for Nickelodeon, and that was a very, very specific cartoonish style. Barbie was a very different style. I've worked on a lot of image type looks, John Byrne looks, and everything in between. So yeah, I mean, it a lot depends on the penciler. If they give me something to work with, they can't just give me a shape and say, make it look like Jim Lee. It doesn't quite work that way.
Yeah.
You got to tell them, you got to be able to draw like Jim Lee so I can ink it like Jim Lee.
Right, exactly.
Right. I can add all kinds of lines and stuff like that, but you're going to help me out a little bit. And if you have a penciler who draws like Jim Lee and the editor wants it to look like Disney, we have a problem.
Right.
I can definitely Disney it up all the way I can, but it's still going to not look like Disney because Jim would have a very particular skill of doing bodies his own way and facial, features his own way. It's still not going to look like Disney. So, yeah.
Good observation. Tell us a little bit about anime, Aaron, the grandmaster of anime research.
I don't know if I'm grandmaster. I haven't watched anime in a long time. I like, Akira and Ghost in the Shell and stuff. I'm probably into more independent comics. Modern anime I haven't really got into. I think the last big anime I was into was Neon Genesis Evangelion. I think that was the mid-90s. I've seen some anime here and there, but it just seems I'm like My Hero Academia and stuff. I just didn't. I used to buy Shonen Jump magazine when it was here in America. They did it for like a year or so, and I read stuff from there. Dragon Ball Z, Naruto when it was going on there, something called Shaman King, and there is a very specific. It's weird because there is specific styles that go from genres. So I've learned that the Japanese, because they are in anime different genres more than American comics. Like I'm not even gonna like Sojo and stuff. I can't remember what exactly. I know there's like romance comics for girls, sports comics. Yeah,
that's huge. It's like serial, daytime soap operas only in.
Oh yeah. And there's a very specific style for those comics. There's a very specific style for like Shonen Jump boys comics. There's sports comics. There's like I don't know. The horror comics is different. So like because you can see like a lot of people will see like I'll see a show and be like, oh, that's a Shonen Jump show, and it's published in Shonen Jump, and so there's almost they split the style between the genres, but I don't know if they split. Like I said, I don't know if they split the genres like mystery, horror, stuff that we do. They're more like these are comics for boys, comics for girls. These are comics about sports, and they split them up more about that. From what I remember. I'd
like to ask you, what's your opinion on? Because a lot of us have seen the sort of what I call the classic seminal anime, let's say Akira, Ghost in the Shell, a Ninja Scroll, those types of things. But let's take Ghost in the Shell, for example, which is sort of everyone can sort of picture those characters in their mind. Yeah. Imagine that. Would it work as well done in, say, an American style?
The funny thing is the manga looks a little different. The anime movie was a little more towards the realistic bent. A little, they pushed it that far.
Mhm.
I think it could. I've seen people draw Ghost in the Shell in American style, like superhero American style. It doesn't
Mhm.
work.
It does. Isn't
Um,
that interesting? There's a
yeah,
level of flavor there, and
I was
it's
just going to say
probably
it
just
loses a lot of flavor.
yeah,
yeah. It is part of the charm, of the visual charm and the visual cues of Ghost in the Shell and Ninja Scroll and Akira are
right,
the weird, quirky, signature anime flourishes that we're all used to.
right.
And that's part of the charm.
And it goes
And
both
that's what I
ways. I
love about
mean,
yeah.
if you see there's an anime TIE Fighter animated short on YouTube. You can find it. It's some guys did it in anime style. It's been out for years. It's Star Wars. It's great. It's very anime. But does it feel like Star Wars?
Yeah.
No. It's weird because you like it. Technically, everything's there, but you change the style. You kind of change the mood. It's the same thing when you put Batman in the anime style. He kind of works. He's probably the one superhero that kind of, because of the cape and stuff, kind of could tend to go a little more towards that. But put Superman in anime style, that doesn't really
Doesn't
work.
quite work. Now, it's interesting how cartoon style, which both of you guys are really good at, both Aaron and Tommy on your own stuff. Y'all do
Yeah.
these fantastic cartoon characters that resonate and they have personality, and you're immediately drawn to them because they're well designed. When you guys do that, that gives the flavor of just pure imagination, like anything can happen. You immediately know and connect with the character on an emotional level. I know with Godlings.
Yeah.
And how do you, is that just come naturally, or is that calculated? Like you just go, oh, he's going to have one eye and a big head and little bitty legs, or, I mean,
It's when I designed some of my characters. I mean, I knew what they did. It was a little calculated what I thought was cool. Visually, I find the animated style easier to display emotions with. Strangely enough, I do think I think what happens is when this is me being an artist. I don't know if this works with anyone. When I look at a realistic style, I'm much more concerned about whether they're getting anything right. Because they start to take perspectives also, whatever, it jumps out. If you do an animated style, no one cares because it's animated. I mean, you don't sit there and look at Charlie Brown and be like, well, the angle of that house isn't quite right because it's Charlie Brown. You don't care.
Yeah.
So I think it's a lot more of like, it's its own thing. It's a whatever. And once you start approaching
It's
realism,
much more forgiving.
it is. And I think that is a huge, where I think people, it's almost like a way of like letting go, especially for other artists. And I think I don't know. I mean, like Charlie Brown. I mean, I watch some of my favorite animated movies are these old Charlie Brown movies in the 70s and 60s. He still resonated in emotion. I mean, those so simple drawings, but I mean, you still feel for Chuck when he gets put down or made fun of.
absolutely.
It's still in this little drawing.
It works. It connects on an emotional level. Tommy, what are your thoughts on like?
No,
when
I
you-
was just
when you do
thinking
your
that
characters.
comparing it to like doing a simplified caricature kind of a thing, which I've done a lot here in Florida out at Disney. But it's just really trying to simplify the thing. I mean, when like for Dean, when you're drawing somebody's face and he's mad and you're drawing all the folds and the frown and all that kind of stuff. So when we draw a guy that's mad, we just go whoop, and then you go, yep, he's mad. You can just tell. We just get a little
Little V between the eyebrows.
That's right. Or instead of drawing the whole eye, you could just draw just a little sliver of a thing, and you go, yep, that's an eye. You get definitely. So I think it's just simplifying the stuff down. And for me, I think it was more the reason. Well, of course, I love cartoony type stuff. I've always loved cartoons, but while I've been inking for forever and stuff, I was never that great of a penciler, but I can really draw some really cool cartoon stuff. And so I've always could do cartoony stuff.
Yeah, and that comes through like I mean, they have energy, they have life. That's the word I'm looking for. They have life, they have weight, and there's something that's immediate about that. And obviously, again, if you got a younger audience, they need to immediately know they don't need the complexities.
Yeah.
If you're doing that realistic style, like Aaron was saying, you're worrying about proportion and perspective and
Right.
all
am I getting the
all the
anatomy
shadows
right?
and
all that.
all that
So
kind of stuff.
it's a lot
Yeah.
more work. But again, I guess too, it's your language, and it's the language I chose. Like, darn, why did I choose such a complex language to speak to you, right? But
And
that's the school I fell into. But some of you guys, I've seen you do other things too. Like Aaron, you do different things. I mean, you can do.
yeah, I do some realistic stuff too. So, and I think this is a lot of people who don't realize a lot of cartoonists know how to draw realistically because that's how we're breaking down the shapes. So yeah, I've drawn like some of my Star Wars stuff. I think you've seen some of my Star Wars pictures.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Approaches realistic, which is a totally different style. Let me see if I even bring up here to even show the difference.
Yeah, it's fascinating because you guys as cartoonists, you do have to understand conceptually realistic illustration.
Yeah.
Because you have to give these cartoon characters weight, and you have to keep a consistency to a degree to their body proportions so that they'll be recognizable from panel to panel, page to page.
Right.
What I've always told people who come up and ask for a critique from me is learn to draw from real life before you caricaturize them.
Yeah. Because you can see when you can actually see in cartoons when it's not working. There are certain styles of cartoons and stuff where they don't hold weight or they're mimicking. And I can't quite put my finger on it, but I can see cartoon stuff where the drawing's technically there, but it's not having the weight or presence that it should. It looks more like maybe you would say a caricature than something alive. And I'm not sure. I mean, it's nothing to do with perspective or whatever. It just has to do with like you get a lot of cartoon people who give their characters expressions and they look like they're during the headlights look. You get a lot of this in kids' books, little kids or whatever, and they have no expression. They just have this, and it's like because they're not either understanding the facial recognition or the way to do that. Because you can display a lot of emotion through body stance, hand movement. People forget that a lot. They don't. I always think it's funny in comics, like so many people when they do talking heads just have the people with their hands straight down by their side. They don't talk with their hands. People talk with their hands all the time.
All the time.
And you can use that to animate that or whatever and stuff. Yeah.
Well, and it's also helpful. We talked about this before in a previous stream. It's helpful to overact a little bit when you're blocking your characters, and to learn from cartoons. Because, the classic Warner Brothers cartoons, learn from how the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote, act and move, and how, they overact to overemphasize. A lot of that can be used with realism because it adds a level of authenticity for a character. For example, like I said before, if two characters are talking, put them in a kitchen and have one of them cooking dinner. Rather than just, give them business to do, rather than just standing there with their arms by their side.
We actually talked about that last Wednesday, about having stuff going on while you're doing talking head scenes.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
I find doing cartoons less stressful. I mean, I'm extremely anal about my inking, right? And I'll go over everything with a fine-tooth comb. But if I'm doing something very, very cartoony, and I did a lot of that. I did some very cartoony stuff when I worked for Now Comics. And I'd ink something and I go, wow, that hand is way too big. Okay. And I wouldn't stress about it. It's a cartoon.
Yeah.
No worries.
My friend, I used to fuss about that with my stuff, and my friend's like, dude, out of all the stuff, like especially a comic book, do you really think they're gonna notice? And I'm like, no, probably not.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, don't worry about it. They're not going to notice. And the other thing too is, even not, if you make a huge mistake, but if you make a mistake, most of the time, most of the mistakes are something you recognize. If you publish a mistake, most people read it and think it's intentional. They don't
Yeah,
think it's a mistake
that's a
unless
good
it
point.
approaches realism. And then they're like, well, that's not right because that's not how reality looks. But like, if you start to, I mean, if I draw the heads too big, somebody go like, well, he does this consistently, so maybe that's what he does.
Yeah, they're
He
all
must
too
be
big.
intentional. Right,
Yeah.
right.
So
Exaggeration in a realistic style is very, very helpful.
yeah,
If you'll notice, we talked about this before too. You get into what I call the superhero style, which is
Yeah.
what all of us are kind of familiar with, especially those of us who were in the industry in the 90s or were fans of the industry in the 90s. There was a certain look codified primarily by Image and Marvel and Jim Lee and that crew, where you had a lot of hatch work. You had exaggerated, collars, shoulders, lots of pouches, lots of blades,
Yeah.
lots of hair
Very
spikes.
thin waists.
Yeah, and possibly thin waists on the ladies, and possibly exaggerated endowments and so on and so forth. So, you do that, and we got so used to it, but in a way, it became like the superhero style, right? So then
Yeah.
when you had Alex Ross come along and do this hyper realism, this photographic realism, you're
Yeah.
like, wow, it was simultaneously cool, but also kind of cold. And I don't mean that as a pejorative at all. It's just an observation that when something is almost too realistic, it's almost like, well, wow, I'm not even looking at a comic book anymore. It almost stops you and
It
takes
Yeah.
loses
you
some
out
of its fun.
the world.
Yeah.
Right.
There
Right.
is
It's
a
the world.
stylization to American superhero comics. There's a
Yeah.
sort of energy. Jim Lee kind of captured that. John Byrne did. I mean, they approach realism, but they're not. There's still that little stylized. And I think Alex Ross was more like, oh, well, this is like a photograph or whatever. The other thing that got me about Alex Ross was I mean, he's a fantastic artist, man. I won't say anything.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's not pejorative
All his
at all.
costumes look like, because he painted the costumes like they were like almost his Halloween fabric bought from a Halloween store.
Yeah, you can see
Like,
the folds.
the
They
The little
look correct.
stitches, yeah, like he's like,
Yeah.
and I'm just like, okay, like I remember like he drew like with the belt of Superman, and he paint the belt to look like one of those cheap plastic belts from the Halloween store, and I'm like, I don't really think Superman would wear that. I mean, would
See,
he?
that's
I
not
don't know.
Superman's outfit.
Yeah, I know. It's I guess. I mean, I don't
It's
know.
almost too
You go,
real,
Superman's lame. What's wrong with Superman?
He always draws everything looking up too, which I understand the idea. They're sort of like these sort of gods, but you look at all his drawings, they're all looking up,
Mhm.
up.
Mhm.
So everybody looks bigger than life, which was really, I don't know. Like I've read some of his comics, and I think again, the spectacle of seeing it so kind of realistic was good. The one of my favorite painters in comics, the guy who paints comics, would be Dan Burrington, who does Nocturnals and stuff. But he approaches much more loose, and I think that keeps that sort of energy.
His is
in
very
there.
stylized.
It is
Yeah.
very, 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 which it really adds to his, especially his nocturnal stuff. I think it
I mean,
really
yeah,
works with
because
that.
you can recognize his brand like from a whole store away. Oh,
Exactly.
there's a Dan Barrington
Yeah.
cover way over there.
Um,
It's
Yeah.
very, very unique style.
yeah.
Well, that brings
With-
me to this too, branding. That's interesting. Does the style, I think most of us would agree that your own personal style with your own material is what you naturally feel comfortable drawing. So it's less calculated and more
Yeah.
out of a natural tendency. So that being said, does that influence the content? Like the more realistic you draw, do you do more realistic stories necessarily? What do you guys think?
I think so. I think most people draw, if they go approach realism, they draw more like stuff on Earth or whatever.
I think it's more serious.
Yeah.
The more
think it's more
realistic
serious?
stories are more
Yeah.
have more drama.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And
My
the
stories
less-
tend to try to be more kid oriented to start off
Right.
with. So
Right.
I don't mean to try to draw them, super, Saturday morning cartoon silliness type of stuff. I still try to put some. So like my wife and I are working on a story about our now. Of course, we've got a new family member. I don't know if you've guys
Aw.
have met Gabby. Have y'all
Aw.
met Gabby? Gabby's our new baby.
Hey, Debbie. I have
It's-
seen
it's
pictures
Miss-
of Debbie.
It's Miss. She's so cute. She's so cute.
Look at that princess. Oh,
Is it
my
Gabby or Debbie?
Gabby.
Gabby,
Oh,
sorry.
Gabby girl, Gabby. But yeah, we're gonna do a story with the don't make myself cry just talking about it. But in a cartoony way of our other pups passing, kind of a thing.
Oh, yeah.
Because people we go to show we did a story called Little Nay and So. It was about my wife's name is Renee, and so I've got all of my cartoony guys are little versions of us, like everybody. Eventually, if I continue with doing all this stuff, you guys will probably end up in there somehow or another.
Woo-hoo.
But yeah, so it's everybody's. So there's a story called Little Nay and So, which one of the puppies was Sophia, and when we did a whole comic series of them and the other dogs, and since they've passed, when I go to shows now, people are asking, how is Vinny doing? How is Bella doing? And then I sit there and start crying. And then it's like, well, they've since passed. But but you're asking, so yeah, it's still going to be really cartoony, but it's going to be a little more serious of a story.
Yeah, that's powerful. It's still powerful, even though the style.
Yeah, I'm still going to draw it the same way as the other.
Right, and that makes sense.
It's going to be a little, more of a serious. It'll be a sweet story, but it'll be
it's still got some drama to it and some sadness to it. I don't know if you guys remember the political comic book called Mouse.
I love it. I have 2 copies of the both books.
Okay, well, there's an example of complete anthropomorphic cartoon for an extremely serious subject.
Yeah, the Holocaust.
Yeah,
and sometimes that can work as a dramatic contrast. It's a foil, right?
Well,
so
my
idea, it's a relief too, because who wants to see that drawn realistic?
Right. And I that's my theory on that, is that it was so far into the drama that he had to do the anthropomorphic animals to kind of offset it, because it was so grim.
Yes.
So absolutely grim that you had to balance it some way. Whereas realistic superhero comics, it's not really, they're drama driven, but they aren't real life.
Right.
No.
If you go to for example, right after 9/11, there was a Captain America story. Do you guys remember this? Where
yes, I do.
He's hunting a terrorist, and that was really powerful. It caused a big stir. People were like, is this too soon? Is this even something we should do, or whatever? Ultimately, free expression and art and so on. And it ends up being a really powerful piece. But imagine trying to do something so powerful, but still, show a respect for it. And I think in the case of Mouse, there's a level of respect by keeping a distance, by using the anthropomorphic cartoon. That's been done quite a bit. And then there's even in Watchmen, which is extremely serious and dark.
Yeah.
There's that. They're doing that. In Gibbons is using a more traditional American superhero comic style.
He's doing much more like the Silver Age, sort of a little more towards that. Yeah. And I think that also Dave Gibbons kind of goes towards that. One of my favorite books by his is the Martha Washington stuff he did with Frank Miller. Yeah. And he's always, his style kind of works towards that. But yeah, it's funny because when you're talking about Mouse, I kept thinking of like the animated movie Watership Down, which is based off a book.
Yes,
stuff like that. Yeah. That are very the animal that are doing, but it's very serious. It's not, for kids or whatever. So and I always thought that was, and strange. Even Ninja Turtles was pretty stylized, the old stuff, and they would go back and forth. But again, anthropomorphized animals, but they were supposed to be mutants in a human world, so they were supposed to be these. Not everything with anthropomorphized. There was one called a European comic called Black Sad. I don't know if you guys ever seen
Not
this.
familiar with that. No.
He is in a complete world. They actually made a video game. He's like, I think he's a panther, and he's a detective, and he goes in this film noir sort of adventures, but the whole world is all animal people.
Well, there was
And
always
that's
Omaha the
hand-painted.
Cat Dancer, where they had the life of the stripper, but they were all
Yeah.
anthropomorphic animals.
That's
Yeah.
right. And
And
I
it's
guess, the content of storytelling, it depends. If you've got a really good writer, then this is true no matter what the style is. But I mean, they could be the craziest looking cartoon characters, and if the writing is powerful, all of a sudden that doesn't even matter. You're going to go right into that story. Good writing just takes over. Wow, that looks awesome.
Yes, it
Tommy
does.
is arting. Look at you, man. Go, Tommy. Go, Tommy. But okay, so tell us, like, if you're approaching a story and you change the style in the middle, does that do anything negative to the reader, do you think? Is consistency important, is what I'm asking.
If, like, the same artist changes his style
like
during the
let's
book?
say an artist is working in a style and then he's like, you know what, I'm sick of
I'm
drawing.
done with this. Let me do something different.
Or else
Yeah,
they
let me
bring
go-
in
let me go
they
more
bring in another
cartoon.
penciler to help finish it because of the issues behind, and so you have two pencilers on one issue.
Yeah.
Okay.
That happens a
Okay.
lot.
That
Well,
does
I mean,
happen a lot.
Is that
What
what
do
you're
you
saying,
guys
though,
think
or you're
that-
saying the same penciler, the guy that's actually, driving the book, is he decides
Either
that he wants
one.
this?
Either
Yeah.
one, either scenario. What does that do? Is that something that what does that do to the reader, do you think? Just thoughts on it.
I don't know, because I don't look at it from a reader's perspective. I'm always looking at it from an art perspective, and it's jarring for me
It
just
is.
because
Mhm.
I'm always picking apart the art.
And
So
Yeah.
I'm coming at it from a different perspective than just a general reader.
Unless there was a reason for it, I think if it's the one artist, the one penciler decides that, I don't want to draw this mainstream anymore. I really want to draw it, instead of the eight head tall, superhero people, I'm going to just do it like chibi style and draw it 2 head tall. All of a sudden, like, people are just going to get turned off. I think, just because he decides. But if there was a like if the story all of a sudden, they got zapped into a video game, and all of a sudden you had to draw it to make it look different, that would be cool. That'd be fine. But I think, if you just change it. Now, if the team changes, that happens, right?
That does happen. That
Yeah.
does happen. And again, due to the strength of the title itself, let's take something iconic like Batman or Superman. If you took those characters, and I think that they're so established that regardless of what style, as long as they had a level of professional competence and excellence, those characters are going to survive. But if you've got a new creator-owned character, I would imagine, from the commercial point of view, you'd want to brand it and you'd want consistency to remain. At least, I would say, for 12 issues, you'd want the style to be the same, or at least in the same wheelhouse, as we'd say. Like, I wouldn't want to see Godlings done realistically. I wouldn't want to see that realistically.
It wouldn't work. And I also branded my book by the pages, and then of course every cover has this sort of border around it to make it look like it's part of an old book. And so there's also other branding. It's one that I don't see a lot of like comics do this, and I think it's a stylization where they actually will brand their comic by the way they structure their book together. Like my Godlings have, let me see here. I have all these notes and thumbnails, but like it has this, every cover has that border around it that I try to do. And then the back always had the same back, but it looks like these like sort of bindings, like it looks like it's bound.
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like it's an actual old book. And then all the pages in there are very stylized with the old. And I think there's something, I don't see a lot of people do that, where they just kind of, they make some pages and they put a cover on. But I think there is something about creating a sort of, I guess you would say, a package.
Yes.
If that makes sense. That, that kind of gives it that feel of like, and this is also where, like, I don't mind doing different covers, but I do want to keep, at least for the initial run, the same art throughout the same book. I know with ongoing series, it's much harder to keep an artist going. But there is something when art changes, when a look changes, you feel like, are these people really even invested in it or whatever? So
Yeah, I think so too. I think rotating creative teams,
yeah,
if it's done too soon, even on an existing character, I think it can be jarring and disruptive. But
right,
certainly on independent comics that we're doing, you got to be very careful about that. And I do think your comment on branding and on graphic design, if you start, for example, having all the gutters and the edges of the page are all like always black. A lot of people do. I like doing
yeah,
that. Keep that all the way through. Don't all of a sudden go white with it. Just
yeah,
keep it with a black background and all that. It gives a certain tone to the book. Color
right.
palettes are like that. I can't speak to that as much because I'm not a colorist, but I would imagine, that the top colorists have color palettes for each character in each book and to give it a tone and a feel.
I do.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
That's right, Bobby. You do that. You do that as well.
They
Go ahead.
Robert Kirkman, who did Invincible, in one of the back of the books, he talked about this. And he had these hardbound graphic novels that collected the entire Invincible series. Each cover of the book had the same sort of format. So if you look at all the hardcovers, they're all graphically, graphically set up the same with the art in the same place, certain things. And so it kind of made them look more cohesive on the bookshelf, which I think sometimes is a very big incentive for collectors. Because I like that. If I put like books up and they all look like they're part of one set, there's something really cool about that. I think you can't do that in single issues too, to a degree. But I think the coloring and stuff, yeah, because I've seen some. I'm trying to think. There's been, I was a big fan of Dark Horse's Conan, and I think the artist who originally did it was Kerry Nord. I'm not sure. I'm trying to. Maybe it's not his name.
I remember his run on that. Yes.
Yeah, very good. Very reminiscent of almost like Frank Frazetta stuff. A little bit pushing towards that style. And of course, he had to back out, and then they switched from another artist. It was still good. I mean, it was still the Conan stories, but it just didn't feel the same. And it was because not just because stylistically, because he did almost a sort of like this quasi hand painted style, and then they switched to more of this dark line, straight up comic book style, and then that's it. So it's almost like they were branding the Conan comics with this sort of specific art style, and then they switched it back to more your basic comic book style, and it kind of defeated the purpose. Like, well, now you took away what kind of made these unique or whatever. A little bit.
Yeah,
so I think it's kind of like, even if you stick with an art style, you still have to mimic that style. And some people they'll just, oh well, whatever, we did that, now we'll just go on the basic. Yeah, but that was kind of the look of that book for a while. And I don't think it would have been that hard to find an artist that would mimic that look. The one thing strange, manga is really good at keeping, because most manga is creator owned, so they don't switch artists. Like Katsuhiro Otomo, he did Akira, he did the whole thing. But they don't. It's almost like they do their project and do the whole thing. I rarely have ever seen any manga where they switch artists. The artists are very dedicated to their series and they stick with it.
And that's why there's been so many manga styles invented, because each artist has a similar but very distinct look to their books, and that's where you get the various styles that are even named now in the manga community.
Right. I mean, if you look at the style, there's a guy who does horror comics, and they're making an animated show of this. I can't remember. Very famous, very different style. I do think that can be a problem in American comics. We're so eager. We have this idea of like, well, we just need to get it done and out on the shelf. So we don't really care who draws it or whatever. And I'm like,
yeah, I've run into that a lot.
I think that kind of bites American comics on the butt. I really think it does. I mean, it would be like if they made, like, say, the Star Wars movies and they just put out someone with like crap special effects. We just need to get it out. I mean, no one cares if Star Wars has great special effects. We just need to get it out. It's like no one would watch it. But comic books, we've almost accepted this, and we've almost accepted the fact if they start an issue, they start a series with a superstar artist, you can be like, well, he's only going to be there for like 3 issues.
Yeah,
we all know that,
sort of,
and then he's going to leave.
You can expect that. Which again, I always say this because it's true. Working for an independent like Silverline gives us the driver's seat.
Yeah.
I mean, Roland is great. It's because he's a nice guy. I've known him for forever, but he really does just say, go get it done, do it. He's not heavy-handed editorial. He's not going to change up things. He's get it done, and that's pretty much it. And a lot of the big two, there's so much, I guess, micromanagement, and that's when things start to unravel. I wanted to focus though on this. Some people have said, we've all heard it said, that the 90s and the early 2000s may have been more about the era of the artist, but we're now in the era of the writer in comic books, American comic books specifically. I would also add, we're also in the era of the colorist because of the advent of digital colors and so on. You have books now that are so color heavy with the rendering and the volume of the characters are created with color, that there's almost I call them coloring book style. The penciler and the inker literally just draw a coloring book, and then the colorist jumps in and gives it dimension and depth and lighting and contours and all that. Give me your thoughts on that, guys. I mean, how do you like that? I for one, it's off-putting to me because I understand it's a style. It's just not to my taste because I cut my teeth on, the old production style, which was very flat. So in order to give it dimension, you had to use hatching and lines, and that hatching and line work became an art form unto itself. Right? Out of necessity. So I think if you do the coloring book thing, you lose that. Your thoughts on that, Aaron?
It's interesting. Yeah, I go back. So in Godlings, I try to render and everything with the hatching, and then add simple colors. If I do the covers, I do just a line work and almost make a coloring book page, and then I render with the color and stuff.
Interesting.
I think that pushes a little more toward, and I think it also fits my style because it pushes a little more towards the cartoon style. Like some you see in cartoon, like that sort of cell shaded look or whatever.
Yes.
So I think that just goes. I don't think like if you like did a lot of cross hatching and say like Dragon Ball Z, I don't think it would work.
No.
So I think it has the I think there's room for others. I think American comics is when you see it the most, in that I think American comics were made to combine these when most like manga and stuff are made, and most of them are black and white, but even when they do colored stuff, they will pull back that. But a lot of like stylized like a manga, I mean, if you look at European comics, they do some cross hatching, but you can see the art is almost meant to be colored. I think they kind of work in conjunction a little bit. I think it just kind of determines the full look you want to go for. I'm actually the next comic I'm going to do, I want to do more of my coloring book style, just because I've never done it in a comic book page before and try that out. It takes me longer to do. I'm much faster with Godlings, so this next book will be 4 issues, probably 3 or 4 issues, because it takes me much longer. But I mean, again, it just kind of goes towards that. The other thing I was going to say, to go back about the branding, the one thing I will say is I think manga has been really good at branding. Disney does this too, but manga is very good at branding with the art style, keeping that consistent artist on there, brands it. When you see like My Hero Academia art, it looks the same. It's that they brand it with that style of art. Dragon Ball Z always looks like Dragon Ball Z. You're not going to have Jim Lee draw Dragon Ball Z and they're going to sell a shirt. It's always going to look like that style. I think that's a huge part of branding. I think that's one thing American comics really hurt themselves with. Branding that like this is the art style that goes with this property, and really making that look. I mean, Superman's
Mickey
great.
Mouse is always going to look like Mickey Mouse.
Exactly. It's always going to look like it. And Superman has gone through, I mean, I love Bruce Timm or whatever did that. I love his stylization, but there's so many variations. So instead of branding it as this sort of property, they brand it as this idea, like, oh, Superman's this character you can draw in all sorts of different styles or whatever. But
I did get into that when I worked on Barbie for Marvel. Because Mattel had their fingers in that, and that was a licensed property. And speaking of branding, they all looked, all the books, and there was a bunch of us artists working on several different. There was Barbie Adventures and Barbie Fashion and Barbie and her little sister, and there were several books, but they all looked essentially the same.
Exactly.
Because we got templates from Mattel. This is how this is supposed to look. She can't have more than 3 eyelashes. Blah blah blah, and they would go over every single panel that was produced and ask us to make changes so that it was on brand. So
you had style guides that you had to go.
Yep,
Yeah, style guides. Now,
Yep.
now Roland just popped up a comment that said, artists do not like house style. They want expression. And it's interesting because I think it's a function. What we're talking about is also there's a commercial component here. There's the elephant in the room that no one's talking about is if you have a property that's been around for over 50 years, right? Or at least 30 years, it really can be stretched and molded. And in terms of the conceptual part of Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Spider-Man, the X-Men are so established that you can make variations.
Right.
If it's yours and you're the guy or the lady who did it and it's your property, I think it's more critical to brand like what you're talking about, to do this sort of hardcore. It always has to look like this, at least the first, 12 issues. I'll give you an example. Spawn, the first 12 issues of Spawn or Todd. And then even when Capullo took over later, he was sort of doing his version of Todd. He has a similar style anyway. So I think it is also a function of the commercial aspect of it. How established is the property? If it's a worldwide known property, then open to interpretation, so to speak. If it's brand new, you better stick to the same look as often as possible.
I can see that. I think it's funny. I understand what Roland's saying, and I think that the expression that comes with a little bit, that's a little bit of a fine arts idea, the expression. And but I'm like looking at it from the audience's point of view, too, trying to think if you go into a store and you really like this comic and this style, and I've had this many a time, and then I look at the next volume and it's a different style, I'll stop buying it.
You'll bail?
I'll bail because it's not the same thing. I just don't.
What about I want to stop you there and I want to go to everybody because I'm gonna make a point on this in a moment. What about you, Barb? Like if you're following a book and they change visual creative team, not the writer, because I'm going to touch on that in a minute. But if they change visual creative team, will you bail or will you stay?
Well, I saw this firsthand on Primal Force. So there were 17 issues of Primal Force, and I was on from the very beginning to the very end, every single issue. And it started out, it was supposed to be a specific creative team. But the penciler about issue number 3 started getting really behind. And so they started bringing in guest pencilers, and all the issues after that were different guest pencilers. And the readership started to fall off. And it fell, and eventually after 17 issues, they canceled the series.
Yep.
And the writing was fantastic, but every single issue had, and I was the only consistent, me and the writer was the only consistent people. And as much as I tried, there was a lot of different, they didn't even try to bring in pencilers that had similar styles. They were all over the place, So I think it was jarring.
What about you, Tommy? Would you drop a book because the artist changed if the writer remained the same?
It depends. Like my Spider-Man books, it didn't matter who was drawing it. I'm just a big Spider-Man fan, and once you get 200 issues into it, it's like, well, I'm just going to keep it.
Mine was a new series. Primal Force was a brand new series that they introduced, and it suffered. I think it suffered from having too many fingers in the pie. It's just. Yeah.
But no, I'm really bad now. If I don't like and some of our artist our writer friends out there are going to be a little mad. So you guys don't listen to me. If I don't like the art, I'll drop it unless there's, unless there's some reason for me, like it's a buddy of mine's book, something like that, or I'm trying to support them, I'll keep picking it up and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, if I'm not liking the art, I tend to, you only got so much money, and you just stacking these books up there that you're never going to read, and and I want to enjoy what I'm reading. So
I think that's a good point. That brings me to where I was going with this. My
wife is sitting across the way there, and she says, "You don't have room for books that you're not going to read." So,
That's right.
See, I know when I go through purges, I'm like, "Why do I have this again?" Because I no longer try to collect everything. But in terms of comic books are a visual medium. Ultimately, I know writers hate to hear that. They're like, "Oh, he said it out loud." Yes,
there's trouble now.
It's a visual medium first and foremost. It's visual storytelling. I can do a whole silent comic book. I may do that one day, just so Roland will be mad at me, where there's no dialogue, no narrative at all, and sell it because you can. Now, the point being that,
but you still wrote it. There's still a writer involved.
In a way, yes, you did. But here's the thing. What Barbara was saying about readership falling off with Primal Force answers the question. It's never a good idea to change creative teams often. Like, obviously, they can't be on it forever. It's going to eventually change.
Right.
But it's good to keep a consistent style, like we went from Todd McFarlane drawing Spawn to Greg, Caputo doing it. So it's good to keep a consistent style that's associated with a successful book. Now, if the book is tanking, maybe the story's terrible or the art is not the best, and you get a better one, then it can work in the other direction. But I think it's art first. Always.
As far as DC was concerned, it was about making the deadlines and getting the books out.
Yeah.
So it was about the bottom line and satisfying their corporate bosses.
Yeah, I think all of the bigger companies are like that, and we want to make money too, so we're not going to it's not do something.
Year between issues.
Yeah, right. So if it's necessary. But it's always like reluctantly. It's not something we're going to plan on. Okay, after issue number 6, we're going to rotate creativity. Let's give this a fresh look. It's like, no, if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Right.
There's no need for a fresh look. If it's selling well, people like what's going on, keep doing it. And keep the artist. Keep the artist and keep the writer. Now, what about let's invert it a little bit? Do any of you guys follow comic book content just for the writing? Because I have friends who could care less who's drawing it, as long as, one of these big heavyweights, Tom King or Hickman or Morrison or Alan Moore or one of these big legend writers, is knocking it out. They will follow it down the rabbit hole, even if it's crazy and you can't understand it. They'll just they'll drink that Kool-Aid no matter who's drinking. It could be stick figures, and I know people will read Grant Morrison.
Yeah, I quit reading the X-Men because of Claremont when he left. Even though Jim Lee was drawing it, it still didn't work. There was a combination of that. Yeah, so I have quit series and followed series that specifically for the writer, especially if it's creator owned.
Yes.
Big fan of Bone. Like, I can't ever see somebody doing Bone without Jeff Smith. That he would ever allow that, but it would I don't think it would work. I think that can almost be an argument between creator owned stuff a little bit than, writers coming onto these titles, mostly like the monthly titles from like the big, companies.
The big two.
Yeah. Because I can't see. I mean, they've had like Mike Mignola's Hellboy. I mean, I have a friend who, like, if Mike Mignola is not involved in it, especially with the art, I think that's more art. But like, if he's not writing it, he just won't even bother because he really I think character writes that character. Yeah.
Yes, I think there's writer loyalty as well. Tommy, did you care, like, when you were following Spidey? I assume you still are. Does the writer matter to you? Like, or are you like, no, just if you like how it looks, you know? Or is it the title?
I haven't bought much of anything new lately, but no, it didn't matter who was writing it, or it just so happens that it was. I guess it was in the shoot. It's been golly a while since I've actually bought a whole bunch of stuff. Being that I print so much stuff at Kablam, I get my fill now.
Yeah.
I don't get a whole lot of. I don't really. I do go to the shops every now and again and look through stuff and like, oh no, I'm not gonna. And but no, I didn't care at the time. But like I was trying to get at is the. It just so happens that like you went from McFarlane to Larson and then to what Mark, what was his name?
Millar?
Sylvester.
No, I guess it was in the 90s or whatever. But I didn't. I just love Spider-Man, so I didn't care who was writing it or drawing it. I still love Spider-Man.
Right.
So
that's a character thing. What about you, Barb? Would you bail if you were reading a storyline and the writer changed? Would you bail?
There are very few writers that I will buy regardless. If somebody else were doing the art on Strangers in Paradise, I'd still read it if Terry Moore was writing it, because his storyline just sucked you in so bad you had to find out what happened the next issue.
Right.
So
Shout out to
there
my
are
friend.
few.
Shout out to my friend Jeff, who just said he's a writer fan because he's not an artist. And appreciate you watching us, Jeff. Jeff's been a fan for as long as I've been drawing, and he loves this stuff. So, but he's told me before, he follows the stories almost regardless of. I mean, he likes the great art, and I have a lot of friends like that too. That they'll follow the storylines no matter who's drawing it. I'm
more likely to follow writers who have a fresh take on stuff. That's completely different from the same old. If a writer is given, can you write for Captain America? It's the 567,000th story about him. So do something. If you come up with something. But if you start out with a book that's completely fresh, completely out there and new and different, Hellboy is awesome. Strangers in Paradise, Bone, that stuff was off the wall, and I eat that stuff up.
Yeah. But that was really, and it's almost creator owned. Like the artist and writer are the same for a lot of those. I don't know if there's a.
And that says something because
it does say something because.
Owned.
I think I know this sounds weird. I think a lot of creators have a little bit of an edge if they're both a writer and an artist because they're able to distill their story better through images. Yeah. In other words, they're able to tell the story through images because they have this running in their head. So instead of a writer trying to communicate it to an artist, like me, like I have this in my head, so I'm just distilling what's in my head onto it. So there is definitely an advantage in that. Mm-hmm. It just feels like when they read Bone, A Stranger in Paradise, it feels very much more cohesive, not two people kind of working in tandem, but like a cohesive vision.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I've often argued that the more individual vision is brought to a subject, a creative subject, often the more loyal the fans are, the more unique the material gets. I'm not a big fan, just personally, of project by committee, which is why I've had a chance to be on set for major motion pictures, and I see how the sausage is made. And honestly, other than selling something I create as an option for Hollywood, I wouldn't want to be in that business simply because it takes so many people to get something done. It is amazing that anything good comes out of 25 cooks in the kitchen, and that's I'll use some examples here, and this it's somehow unique in the way it gets a reaction from people. Zack Snyder's Justice League, for
Yeah.
example, being that singular vision. You know, there are people who love it, people who hate it, but at least it matters, right? It makes its
It
mark
did.
and it's memorable. You know,
Yeah.
it doesn't feel like it was calculated and built by a marketing team to do well.
No.
You know, there, like you said, Aaron, you said it well. There's an edge to it, and that
Yeah.
edge you're talking about is a unique vision, which gives it magic and charm and appeal, or
Right.
completely turns people off. But again, you remember it, right?
And this is the same. I mean, some of the greatest. I mean, even speaking of filmmakers, I mean, Quentin
Right.
Tarantino. I mean, you either love
Yeah,
Quentin
memorable.
Tarantino or you just don't get him.
Yeah.
And I think
Right.
Zack Snyder was a filmmaker. Now, I know Christopher Nolan was heavily involved in that because he had just done the Batman series, and he was the executive producer of the whole thing. And him and Zack Snyder worked closely on this. This is why when they said the DC universe was so dark, I was like, well, yeah, duh, because they just got done doing Christopher Nolan's Batman, which was dark.
Right.
That seemed to be
Right.
work because they made a ton of money.
Yeah.
And so, of course, they're
Yeah.
going to keep that going. And
Right.
a lot of
Right.
people, I remember
Right.
people complaining that the Batman versus Superman was too dark. It was too dark of a movie. And I'm like, well, yes, it has Batman in it. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, Batman exists at night. There's got to be some component of darkness in that movie with Superman because you don't see Batman running around in daylight. It just doesn't work. He's going to be at night. So you're going to have that darkness and they say defeated the character. I'm like, yeah, you are literally playing with day and night sort of characters in that movie. But I do think there's a vision. Kevin Feige, I think is it Kevin Feige's in charge of the MCU? Is that who it is?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I think
He
he's
drives-
brilliant.
He's really good. There is a look to them, but he does have different directors, so there are different takes on a little bit of the film. There's a cohesive enough vision, but there's a little differences and nuances in each one, which I think could be good or bad. But I mean, after 20 films, I mean, again, I think it's much more easier to keep a cohesive vision of Zack Snyder's 3 movies. It was supposed to be 5 movies, but the 3 movies we got, than it is over 20 movies. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a challenge for them to do that. I think arguably, Jon Favreau really set a great standard.
Oh, I
with
love Jon Favreau's direction. Yes.
His Iron Man 1, the sensibilities of that film just really
Yeah.
launched the whole MCU. And I think that speaks for itself. There's a nice balance between, as we've said before, the fantasy and the reality level. And he seemed to get that sweet spot of the superhero movie that appeals to the modern audience.
Modern audience, yeah. And so I think I grew up in the '80s when the grim, dark superhero stories were coming into vogue. That's mostly stuff I read. Dark Knight Returns, that stuff. So Zack Snyder stuff obviously resonates more with me than the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which was a lot of that sort of George Perez Avengers sort of, which I like. I have George Perez's run on Avengers, but that sort of fantastical superhero, bright colored stuff.
Yes.
It's not what I grew up on, or not what I was interested in superheroes. The more darker and grittier, the more interesting I found it. So Zack Snyder's obviously, definitely spoke much more to me. And I do like the idea of, taking the idea of like he did was like, well, if you did have somebody like Superman on Earth, I mean, he would be like a god. I mean, just like that question of somebody like that on Earth. And, I thought that was interesting just to debate, like, should he be doing all this stuff? Is it political? I thought all that stuff was kind of fascinating because there's questions I'd like to explore if this was really happening. Instead of like, well, yeah, he's out there doing good Superman. I'm like, well, yeah, everybody would be scared of this guy because if he got mad or had a bad day, he could decimate a state or a country. It's like, so I mean, there was a sense of fear in that too that I think is also addressed in that film, which I think is kind of important. And I think they started doing. I did think it was funny how the two universes would feed off each other. I don't know if any of you guys ever realized this. So in the Man of Steel, the big criticism was that at the end, he pretty much decimated Metropolis with the big fight with Zod. Okay.
Right. Right.
And which I'm like, of course, because Zod wanted to kill all the humans. Like, why didn't he take Zod outside the city? Because Zod would just fly back. Zod's whole idea was decimating the civilians. He wanted to kill everyone. Superman was trying to stop him. So yeah, and of course that makes more realistic that people would die in an event like that. And then later on in the films, they started addressing that more in the Marvel. Like there was one where this lady confronted Tony Stark in one of the movies, and my son. I think that was the one when he fought the Hulk in the city. Well, my son was killed in
No,
that
that was
accident. Whatever.
Sokovia. Her son was killed in Sokovia when it
Right.
fell in
Mhm.
Age of Ultron.
Actually, that stuff started becoming much more prevalent in the Marvel Cinematic Universe after all the criticism against the Man of Steel. I thought that was kind of interesting.
It's
Well,
interesting they did feed off each other, but there's a key to the Marvel universe, and it's neither good nor bad. It's clever, and it's humor.
Yeah.
And the humor in the Marvel universe is a way to use elasticity of storytelling, to relieve the tension of believability, and it's also sort of the oil in the machinery that allows everybody to release tension and go, oh yeah, that's right, we're supposed to be having fun. So if you see all this crazy stuff that's unbelievable, this is supposed to be a fun movie, so I'm not going to challenge it too much. Now that does two things. It allows you to do crazier stuff and use the Tesseract as the MacGuffin so that anything can happen, because hey, it's a Tesseract and it opened a wormhole and a bunch of stuff just came through, but we don't really have to explain that. But then again, tone can be balanced and work really well. And Marvel walks that tightrope, I think, arguably pretty well. They'll slip off a little bit here and slip off a little bit there, and it'll be too funny or it'll be, to this or to that. But overall, they walk that tightrope well. DC's finding its footing, but it's because of the individual visions, I think, that we've seen. And it's interesting as a creator in an open publisher like Silverline, where we don't have to really align ourselves to any sort of expectations. We really can walk whatever line we want. It can be balanced with humor and seriousness. It can be very deep. It can have deeper discussions going on and then humor to release the tension. It can have no humor at all. It can be all humor. And so that's what's so exciting about this, is because we're not dealing with very expensive properties that are making a lot of executives, tons of money for their third home and their vacation to Europe and Vail and Denver and putting their kids through, Ivy League universities. We don't have to worry about that. We're trying to tell the best story we can with our own characters, which is what makes, Silverline so great.
Here's something that about the DC universe that I think is interesting, and that they're pushing back against the audience's preconceived notion of what their hero is. For instance,
you're talking
Superman,
about the movies, right?
Yeah, Superman,
the movies, right?
Yeah, right, the MCU.
Yeah,
the movies. Is that like it got a little bit uncomfortable with Superman destroying the city and stuff like that, because the audience tells themselves, oh, well, this is Superman, so we already know what to expect. We expect a good guy. But the point is, the people in the story, in the fictional story, don't know he's a good guy. They have to react as if they are uncertain about where this guy is coming from, what he's going to do, what his true motives are. And I think it makes it more interesting if the writer throws a monkey wrench into it and makes the audience see it from the fictional character's perspective. Well, this is making me a little uncomfortable. This isn't how I expect Superman to act.
Yeah, I thought it was funny. It's very much, and also not to interrupt, the idea of you were talking the humor, light and the levity. I think that's very fascinating, because to me, I remember, and I don't really care what anyone says about the movies. I just think it's interesting people's critique. Everyone critiqued Superman would never let the city destroy the city. It's not my Superman. It's too dark. He's killing stuff, blah, 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 blah. The original Avengers movie, the end took place in New York. As you're watching that scene, did you ever stop to care about all the people being slaughtered in that fight? I heard no critique about like, well, why didn't the Avengers take the aliens out of the city? They're slaughtering all these people in New York City with all these aliens flying around. It's like, well, yeah, because it's a bunch of humor and goofy, so we don't care. The seriousness of Superman's movie and the fact that they actually showed more scenes in that movie of people reacting to the fight. Go like, oh, there's people involved in this. You hardly ever see. You see some people react a little bit in the Avengers, but the Avengers scene, you never hear the same criticism. That whole scene, they were decimating New York City. Oh yeah,
No, because we saw the
they're
whole
superheroes.
swinging
Yeah,
people around and making fun of stuff. Yeah.
yeah. So
Right,
it's
right.
like
Well-
we don't care. But with Superman
Yeah.
does it. Oh well, we can't have that. I'm like,
Well,
okay, you can't throw
again,
shade at one and not look at what you're throwing shade from. It's like, okay, you're doing the same thing.
You
I
can
just find
save
that
notions.
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, it's apples and oranges, because what DC arguably is trying to do is create a world. What Marvel is trying to do is relate to the viewer. So that there are two goals. Like, Marvel's primary concern is, we got to make this fun. This is connected to right now. It's connected to pop culture. These movies are not necessarily meant to be timeless. They're meant to be fun popcorn movies. We're going to wink at you. We're going to nod at you. We're going to use pop music. We're going to use modern this, modern that. And DC's movies arguably may stand the test of time longer because they are disconnected from our world. They are their own world. That is the world. You are in Metropolis, and you know the creators don't really care, other than conceptually what they're trying to sell you on. They don't care whether you necessarily think this is cool or not. They want you to like it, but they're not going to pander to you. There's a sense on the Marvel side of pandering. Hey, look, we're going to play this song. Like, hey, we're going to open the credits with Stairway to Heaven because we know everybody will love it, right? Well, yeah, that's cute, and you'll make a lot of money, but you know, what about the world itself, right? You just took me out of the world, right? Yeah. But it's okay, because if I'm enjoying the movie, so you see they're creating two different products. One is meant to be an entertaining popcorn movie. The other is a little more toward fine art. And I'm not trying to overstate and say one is better. I'm just saying one is a little more toward a fine art piece, and one is a little more toward hey, let's have some popcorn and watch some stuff blow up.
It depends on what kind of mood you're in that day.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. I need to be taken out of my head. Let's go see the MCU.
Let's go see the MCU and laugh a little bit and watch some stuff blow up. Or maybe you're in the mood for something a little more serious. So you want to go to the DC universe. We have Jeff saying the Avengers tried to help many civilians while Superman made out with Lois Lane in the middle of a crater.
That's kind of it is kind of funny, but his little bit of his flaw in his thinking is that the Avengers were a team of people. Superman was one dude. So if Superman was trying to save people, what's Zod doing? Killing people.
Right.
So Superman had to constantly be fighting Zod. He can't go off and save. I mean, the Avengers could be like, the Hulk will fight and there were many scenes of like, okay, I'm going to rescue these people while the Hulk, you stave off the aliens. They would work as a team. There's no team. So that I would push back against that and say that doesn't really work. That's not the same thing. Not in my mind, at least.
Of course, I'm a Tony Stark lover, so you know who I go with.
Yeah, I can see the point, but again, these two production companies are making different products. So you're really comparing a Big Mac with a steak. Yeah, it's like what it's whatever you're in the mood for. The DC movies tend to be a little more toward the steak, and the Marvel movies a little bit more towards a really great hamburger.
Right.
And they're both great. It just depends on what what you're in the mood.
I personally just like the DC, my superhero stuff a little more serious, but that's all and like I said, I wouldn't. It wouldn't bother me, but I mean, every time I go to like a convention and say that, people are like, "You like DC over Marvel?" I'm like, God, seriously, dude? Like,
I know people
are there
freak
bigger things
out,
going
man.
on in the nerd kingdom than whether I like DC over Marvel or vice versa, whatever?
I know. I know.
Disney's a little too formulaic to me. I like something that pushes the edge, or something that says something different. And this is not Marvel. Disney is very formulaic in how they do their movies. All the movies. I mean, you even see all this new Star Wars movies coming out. Like, oh, you could replace the Star Wars characters, Avengers characters, and have the same movies. So it's just to me, it's like, if you like that formula, great. But after like 5 movies, I'm like, okay, I get what you're doing, and I got bored. I was like, okay, yeah,
Right.
Did the Mandalorian
just
bore
nothing
you?
here for me anymore. What?
Did the Mandalorian bore you?
The Mandalorian, I haven't even watched the 2nd season. I did like it. I liked it better than the others, but there were some episodes that were better than others. But then again, I'm sitting watching this and I'm like, well, yeah, this is great. It's Lone Wolf and Cub, which we have seen this story 1,000 times. So there's a part where, like, again, I'm like, I like the show, but it's not as different. It's very much wearing its influences on its sleeve, and I'm like, okay, so he's basically a samurai character with this baby. I've seen this before, and again, I know you can't tell completely original stories. So
I've never ever
Are we getting some comments? Wait.
Oh yeah. Well, once you bring up this, people love to argue about these movies.
Tell him, Dean. What did Jeff is saying? I prefer my Superman screenplay to anything Zack Snyder came out with. Tell him, Dean. Jeff's also a writer and wrote a fantastic Superman screenplay, and he's very much as he likes Marvel, and I know he does. Yeah, he's very much a DC person, and grew up reading more DC than I ever read, and can write a serious, cohesive DC world that you will believe, and you would actually love it, Aaron. You really would. And then Roland chimes in and said, "It's a comic book. I don't want my comic books too serious. My life is serious. I don't want my entertainment to be." Which,
that's me. That's why I like the MCU, because I like my heroes to be heroes, and I want to be entertained.
Yeah, and that's and you know that the MCU is doing a fantastic job with that. And you know, again, it's a taste thing. I always tell people, you know, guys, it's not really an either or. You know, sometimes I want vanilla, sometimes I want strawberry, sometimes I want chocolate. I'm not gonna, you know, hate on the people who just want vanilla all the time.
I understand what Roland's saying. I would push back a little bit in that too, as everyone has their own version of what's entertaining. The Marvel movies bore me. I mean, I literally halfway through the movie, I'm like, I don't care anymore. There was so much stuff flashing on my screen. There's so many quips. There's so many jokes. It's because you're a
psychology major.
I feel Aaron's pain there too, because I'm also sort of more melancholy in my personality, and a little too much of a self-analytical deep thinker as well, and studied a lot of philosophy and all that. So I like that stuff too. But what I love is when you can have all of that in there, and then everyone can enjoy the levels that they want to enjoy it on, right? So we talked about this before too. One thing great about Shakespeare was that he wrote to the cheap seats, and then he wrote to the expensive seats too. So he wrote to the people who were just there to be distracted from their tough day-to-day life, and then from the hoity-toity intellectuals who wanted to talk about the existence of God afterwards. You know, he got everybody. And I think all of us, on some level, we understand that a level of excellence tries to hit as many of those notes as we can. You know, let's have something for the deep thinkers who want to be melancholy. Let's have something for the people who want to have a great time. And let's give something to everybody in this. And if you can do that well, man, you know, you're a genius if you can do that.
Well, I think also one, and this is the one thing that and this is even a critique less about the movies and more about comics, is I get this a lot about comics. Comics are supposed to be fun. Comic books are supposed to be fun, lighthearted. Why? Books, movies all have certain genres: mystery, drama, very serious themes. Books cover very serious, heavy topics: philosophy, psychology, science. Why do comic books have to be dumbed down, stupid stories all the time? Why does it constantly have to be fun? Why cannot we have those genres in comic books just as well? Why can't we have a bit? Because I think this is what's biting comic books a little bit. Because guess what? Manga has this, right? Manga does have these genres. American comics do not. Unless it's fun, goofy, and bright-hearted, it doesn't need to be in comics. I can't stand that because it is a way to close off creative thinking. It drives me nuts.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I think part of the key to the answer is that it's what your intention is. If the creator's vision is a certain thing, then that's the creator's vision, and it may not be, your cup of tea. But it's all authenticity and the genuine nature of the creator's vision. I'll give you an example, but before I do, Jeff says, serious and dark don't necessarily equate good writing. Heavy themes handled poorly tend to be more amateurish than deep. He's right. Deep is harder. Deep is harder to write. And that's why more people don't do it, because it's difficult.
So I have to ask this because I always get this. What do they technically mean by dark? I get this out. Dark isn't visually dark? Or dark isn't dark themed? Heavy themed. Again,
heavy themed in terms of more intellectual, in terms of analytical, philosophical, asking bigger questions, in terms of existential things, rather than just
it's
good guys, bad guys.
So why is it? So I guess I project. So why is that bad in a super?
To me, it's not. To me,
right.
It's not.
I know it's not. But why to other people? Why is it? Again, why does it have to be one way or the other? Again, I always
it doesn't.
Like, so many people in comic book, like I know comic books. Like yes, everybody's a complete authority on their comic books and like comic book medium, and I'm like. Again, I think this is one of the things biting why American comics doing so bad. I have lots of reasons, but that's one. There's just lack of creative vision. I don't hate. I grew up in Western comics. Nothing that manga does can also be found in Western comics. It is if you pick the superhero with Roland, if you pick the superhero genre in Western comics, okay, because that's a genre in itself, and then put other books from other genres, sees which one has way more representation. Superheroes by a huge margin, enormous margin. And then if you want to go like, well, but there's mystery science, there's mystery superhero comics, and there's dark superhero comics, and there's goofy. Yes, but superheroes are their own genre. It's a huge, well overrepresented.
So you're saying it's a wide open tent that allows for just like you walk into a bookstore, you go to the mysteries, you go to horror, you go to all these different. So you're saying that the superhero genre is so big that it can contain these separate subgenres.
Yeah, there's many. Okay. I mean, you would sit there and say, Watchmen technically is a mystery comic, but it's a superhero comic.
It's a
so
superhero.
What is it first? Is it a mystery comic or is it a superhero comic?
I would do the genre subgenre. Right?
Then it would be superhero mystery. It's a mystery superhero comic. You see, it's not a mystery in itself. It is a superhero comic with a mystery component. That's what I'm getting at. It's the subject matter that it's always people with powers or costumes or whatever, and it overtakes everything. I read superhero stuff. I have Wonder Woman. All over my room. I enjoy it, but I do think when they ask why don't more people read comics, because unless you like superheroes, this is for Western comics. Great. If you don't like superheroes,
well,
where do you go? There are comics out there that are not superhero, but they're very small. It's a very small margin.
I think the market for American comics has always been dominated by superhero comics because. In my opinion, we do it best. We do it better than anybody else. I think America does superhero comics better than anybody else. I think other countries do comic books that are fantastic, that are stunning visually and provocative in their content. Asian, European, from all over the world. But what we do, what we codify and what we describe as action adventure superhero comics, that's American. And again, it's like a taste thing, but it is so popular, Aaron, that it can stand to have these subgenres put in it. You might want to do maybe you do a breakdown where, how we learned in biology, you do kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus,
Right.
species, right? So maybe you do a breakdown of all the different comics, right? You start out with like superhero comics and then subgenre, mystery or thriller or, whatever it is, horror. I think what you're saying is that there's so much superhero out there that many people think that should be the litmus test. And you're saying, no, the litmus test should be, is it a good story? And is it a good character?
Well, litmus tests, and like for instance, when I talk to my friends, who are not comic book readers, you want to read comics. And the first thing they say is like, well, I'm not into superheroes.
Right.
See, it's that overarching thought, like, yeah, but if I'm not into superheroes, then why would I be interested in comic books? The fact that you have to explain, there's many more stories besides superheroes. Where?
Yeah.
That's kind of the thing. I mean, look at The Walking Dead is a perfect example of a breakout. I mean, it hit the zombie whatever market just right. The whole zombies are popular.
Yeah, sure.
But again, I met so many people who were reading The Walking Dead and reading comic books for the first time because they found the comic book that was not superhero. I asked them, do you read any other comics? No, I just read The Walking Dead because I like horror. This is what I'm saying. It's like, so that was a break-in, but it's one of these things, like, I think we could, push the more stuff too. There's so many people that I've explained that Why the Last Man, the show that's on, was a comic book. Really? The fact that they don't know that. Everybody knows that Superman's a comic book. Oh yeah, let's go see the superhero movie. That's a comic book movie. They already know. Nobody knows that Why the Last One was a comic book. Nobody knows that. So many people I meet, and I'm just like, you should read the comic. Oh, I had a friend whose mother loved Sin City. Loved it, right? You should read the comic book. Oh, I don't read comic books. I don't do that. It's a comic book, really? I had no idea. Because people associate comic books with superheroes. And that mindset is one of the things that I think is kind of defeating if you're into superheroes. And of course, gives that sort of like what comics are for kids. This is, of course, changing the younger generation and stuff with, more people getting into manga, whatever. But again, if the younger generation if the younger people are going to manga because maybe they're not into superheroes or whatever, I don't know, but I mean, it's true. I mean, manga. I mean, I have many reports. I mean, there are certain series of manga, specific series, that are dominating sales of the entire Western comic market. That's a huge red flag. Why is that happening?
I think it is, and I think it's a call, and it's a call to all of us, right? Yeah. To produce what we consider quality stories and art, to bring people out of the expectation, the stereotypes, so to speak. There's cultural stereotypes about what comic books are. Remember when we were kids, back in the day, comic books were just for nerds, right? Nobody admitted that even read them, right? And then they became mainstream because of the movies and so on and so forth. So I think it's ever evolving. Yeah. And I do think that there will come a day that we might see where people love comic books because they come in all shapes and sizes, and it's not just superhero. But I think that's our claim to fame, so to speak.
It is.
And I can't really fault that. It's kind of like the American Western. People combine every Western, no matter where it's made, what country it's made in. They're going to always compare it to the American Western. And to me, that's not necessarily pejorative. That's like a badge of honor. Like, yeah, that's right. We defined the American Western idea of the gunslinger and the hats and the cowboys and all that stuff. All of that has a feel to it, and it's distinctly American. And there's something charming about that. And I feel the same way about superhero comics. Yes, the negative parts of it you've pointed out, and I think we are ready to grow beyond that. But it is something I think, wow, that's pretty cool that we made that big of a mark on the world, No,
I think, and I like I said, I don't think there's anything technically wrong with superhero comics. I think we've gotten ourselves into this sort of catch-22 where we have developed this mindset. Disney did the same thing with animation, okay? I remember when animation came out, people would be like, when they watched Akira, you watch this what is all this violence? I remember I showed part of Akira in a class to some students when I was in junior high. They'd never seen anything
Right.
like it because animation, Disney dominated that. All animation is for kids. It's supposed to be family friendly. What is this? In other words, not so much what is this animated adult animation as more of like, why would somebody even think to do this? Because you're breaking these sort of taboos. And this is that cul-de-sac we've gotten ourselves with the comic books, I think, into a lot of Western comic books is for non-comic book readers. They just see comic books as like, well, yeah, they're for kids and they're superheroes, and that's it.
When you talk to your friends,
yeah,
Aaron, when you talk to your friends, do you point out alternative comics for them to read?
Oh yeah,
depending on their taste.
I show them Bone. I show them like, people like, hey, you made like Bone. I have Nocturnals. Which is completely different for like a lot of like, hey.
Hello.
Did we lose him?
I don't know. He just kind of froze there.
And so
he's back.
Like, hey, you should check out Alien Legion, like science fiction. Like all of these very non-Western, and they'll kind of look at them and they'll like, yeah, but comic books are really just still for like nerds and stuff and superheroes.
You know what you're running into
it is weird. Yeah,
they're not.
Tell them they're being snobs.
Fans.
Tell them they're being very snobs.
Snobby. They're snobby.
Yeah.
I don't sully myself with comics. I'm gonna read something that's more political and more relevant. It's like, okay, well,
right.
That's not our people, man. That's not our people.
But
they're not gonna like
those snobby folks will turn around and go see all the Avenger movies and look how much money they're making. So
I know,
they're lying to you.
Yeah.
All we gotta do is
it's Oh, sorry. I'm going to say I guess they don't see it as like as an art form, and this is, I think, in a lot of other countries, I think they see comics much more of an art form than in America. And
they do.
I think
it stunned me to hear and read mostly about how comic book artists were treated in Europe and in Asia, like celebrities, dude. They're like celebrities, right?
Yeah.
And it's a different thing here. I mean, like, but we're getting there. We're getting there now.
We're getting there slowly. And
I want my private jet, and I want a trip to Hollywood right now.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Gotta do. Hey, who knows what's gonna happen with Divinity, right? I mean, just keep putting out a good book. Keep putting out a good book, Barb. You never know. Hollywood might come and knocking on that door.
Did you see the photos online on Twitter of Derek Robertson going to the Emmys for The Boys? That was cool.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
Some of the colleagues are out there. Well,
I know,
guys,
it's great. Somebody I used to work with.
And it's something I'm excited about, the fact that we create in a world and in a field that began as a distinctly American art form.
Yeah.
And then has branched out and just become the phenomena that it is. And we have the opportunity to make our marks with our characters, and maybe reach, commercial success or artistic success, depending on, where we want to go. For me, it's like, hey, if I can someday make a living and I got a few thousand readers that love it and read it all the time, hey, I'm happy, right? But if Hollywood comes a calling, sure, I'll sell the option. That being said, guys, we're getting close to the end of the broadcast tonight. I want to thank everybody for doing such a fantastic job. This has been a great discussion. Aaron, Tommy, Barbara, thank you so much for being here tonight and sharing your thoughts on this. Tommy, thanks for arting and showing people how it's done. That's how to ink, folks. That's how to do it. Showing us live. It's always fun to do. Once again, we want to thank our sponsor, Daytona Beach Comic Convention. We want to thank Kablam, Tommy's company that prints our material. I want to thank them. They are fantastic and have always been a champion of the independent comic book publisher. Definitely. And we appreciate that. We want you guys to go check out silverlinecomics.com. We want you to go to Kickstarter and check out the Christmas special, Silverline Christmas special. Follow it now so you'll be notified when it goes live and support it. We have it both on Kickstarter and Indiegogo. Show some extra love to Indiegogo because we're just getting started in that arena, and we'd like to make our mark there. We appreciate everybody listening. We appreciate you being with us tonight. And we have a phrase we all like to close with, so I'm gonna bring it up here. What
Good
do we all
night,
say?
and later on. No, that's not.
Make mine Silverline.
Make
Mine
mine
Silverline.
Oh, we're so-
Silverline. See you next week,
We're
everybody.
so in sync.